Right. And I mean, no disrespect, Susan, because I work for a company like yours that went through that sort of cycle, but 10, 15, 20 years ago, everybody wanted a Nokia phone. And I bet people didn't complain about toilets and heating and so on and so on, because they were selling phones faster than they could make them. And I think, and I worked at Dell Computers, when everybody in the world wanted a Dell computer around the same sort of time. So we didn't have an FM strategy. I was told by my boss in Dallas, in Austin, that I'm not in property and real estate, I'm in the capacity business. And all my job is, and my team is to provide seats for bums to sit on and answer the phone to sell Dell computers. So we had no nice strategy, no nice property issues until we realised it wasn't sustainable. And guess what? HP started making computers that people wanted to buy, and suddenly it became important. And I just wonder, in Sue's 20 years at Nokia, how that up and down cycle has affected the answer you might give to that question.
I think it's a very good point. And I just point out that if you ask the question in 2 years' time, I bet nobody has got a Nokia phone because we stopped making them about a year ago. We sold our mobile phone business to Microsoft about a year ago. So, but I do absolutely understand what you mean. I think in a way it's the whole world has changed. When I joined Nokia, the first year I put together a budget for FM, and I looked at what we'd spent last year. I spent hours poring over spread. This was just for one site, the factory and R&D site. What had we spent on, lift repairs and goodness knows what else. And I added my 2 to 3% on every line and sweated over it and sent it in. And the finance guy came back the next day and perched on the edge of my desk. He said, "I'm looking at your budget." I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a bit surprised, really." And I'm thinking, he's going to ask me to cut it. And he said, "With everything that's going on, I think we should stick at least another 10% in there." It's the only time it's happened to me in my career, and I can't see it'll ever happen to me again. But, that was the way it was, because we were just churning everything out. The factory was going, all they cared about was that the factory kept going. One guy wanted to turn off the smoke detectors in the kitchen because sometimes somebody left a piece of toast in the toaster, and then the factory got, everybody was out in the grounds because the fire alarms had gone off. And he was going to me, "It's £100,000 a minute. Get them back in." I was like, God. And that was what drove us, because we were extremely successful. And you're right. When the down curve starts, things change. We start to cut back. And yes, you go from. I was going out and buying big TVs to put in the restaurant so that when people took their breaks, they could relax and watch TV. And we had games rooms with PS somethings in, and all this sort of stuff. And then, of course, as soon as it happened, not only did we not want people sitting around playing games, but we needed the space because we were cutting back on space and we were subletting space and we were taking the games room and putting another 6 desks in there. And so it does change, and unfortunately it influences. I'm thinking from a lot of the stuff I'm reading, we may be coming out of that again. There's a lot of talk about kind of the talent war and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, but I do also know that there are still companies that are laying people off, that are making people redundant because they don't need them anymore. And I'm aware that, in the middle of us doing our transformation or transition or whatever the fancy word is that we have for it, that, there are likely going to be, along the way, there are going to be people who don't get there, don't stay to the end. So it is a difficult thing that is very much based on, I think, how successful or otherwise the company's being at the moment. And, people still come in and say, "Do you know at Google they have a fruit fairy who delivers fresh fruit to their desks every day?" And I'm like, great, good for Google. When we start making the kind of profit they make, then we can have a fruit fairy. But at the moment, no.
I actually have one. 5 different generations in the workplace. 5. Never happened before. They're not leaving because they can't afford to, because their pensions are worthless, let's be honest. We've got younger kids coming in with totally different demands. How is that impacting your FM strategy? Anybody on the panel?
I think it needs to be more, excuse me, sorry. I think it needs to be more flexible. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the FM strategy, but I think the space in which people work, that's the key to getting the best out of people, I think. I know it's a bit of almost a throwaway comment, but I think it's very important. We haven't really focused a lot on that in the past. We provided space based on location, cost per square metre, particular type of fit out. Now I think we need to look at providing space to get the best out of the people in it. And that, I think, is the way in which we will start answering those questions around the fact that we have, as you say, 5 different generations of people at work.
How many of you are looking at that in your workplace right now? One,
Nobody.
2, 3, 4, out of this whole room. How many of you have already done it? Have already created places where they can choose where they work? How many of you have people working from home? How many people have hubs instead of central offices? How much does that agile workforce, if I go back to, Jeremy, what you said, the agile workforce and middle management who are used to looking to see how long the jacket stays on the back of the chair as presenteeism, how much is that being impacted?
Well, I think it certainly impacts in terms of people getting their heads around that way of working. I spent a year with Regis in a global role, and seeing how the trends in different countries are all going in the same direction around the agile workforce, and they're at the heart of that in terms of their offering. Their biggest growth area is co-working space, where you don't, for people using their space, instead of having an office, companies will just say, no, we just want some desks where people can just come and dump themselves down, and actually they might be near another organisation, and actually it's that whole kind of connectivity piece. Now, I mean, that's really, you start to think like that, and oh my, how do you manage people around that? And actually they might be going into any location to do that, and the people managing those folk, not only are they now potentially mixing with people in different teams and departments of your organisation, but potentially in different companies as well. And that's, so, I suppose there's both in FM, how do we adapt to provide that kind of space for in our businesses, or indeed kind of outsourcing that in the Regis style model that they're offering. But as you say, how do people manage that? And I think technology has a role to play, because at the end of the day, you can't get away from the fact that those managers will want assurance around productivity. And actually, the business needs that assurance. You need to know that the job's getting done. And whilst trust is hugely important, you want that backed up with some data that gives you assurance that the job's getting done. So I think technology is probably the key to providing that, whether people are working from home, in these kind of co-working spaces, dropping in and out of hubs. And that's, I think that's where the answer probably lies. And then, of course, you've got to help people learn how to use it.
It's interesting you say that, because Marissa Mayer from Yahoo was slated for bringing everybody back into work, made everybody come back into the workplace. Everybody had to work out of the office. And actually, that was just bad PR. Because what actually happened was, prior to that, people had, working from home days. And she asked her IT department to look at the last 2 months and see how many people logged on Fridays that were working from home, and it was less than 20%. Less than 20% were actually doing the work that they had to do. And that's why she brought them all back. It wasn't because she was being some dragon leader and said, you must, after she'd already had her baby, and brought them all back and said, well, now that I've finished with my working from home stint, that you must now come in. So it was a really strongly led business decision. How many people just manage remote workforces? How many of you were given training on how to do that? One. Because it is a talent. It does take skill. It does take a transition from our way of always being, the way that we used to always manage, from looking at our workforces by who was sitting directly in front of us, to managing outputs and how do you do that and how do you stay in touch? How do you maintain the culture if nobody's actually there anymore? So a couple of highlights from me. Firstly, a round of applause for the panel. In summary, I just would like to ask you each one, if you could give one tip on how to actually get our team members to be the heart of our FM strategy, what would it be, Chris?
I think, to go back to a point that I said earlier, very briefly, is have a look at what the plan is for the business. Focus much more on what the core objectives of business. If you want these guys to be able to support you within FM, they need to know how they link to what that business is trying to do.
Susan.
I think in FM we have to start looking at where our added value is. You know, business as usual, we've been doing it for so long. We ought to be able to do all those things that, you know, make sure that they've got a good working environment, a good basic working environment. Where can we add value? What else can we do?
Communication. Make sure that you're communicating with your employees, your team members, absolutely every step of the way, so that every decision is justified. People understand what's going on. They understand how they contribute to that change, and just you know, the basis of strong change management principles.
Jeremy?
So I was just reflecting on where we got to in the discussion, and particularly the question around employees at the heart of the FM strategy, and talking about actually that life cycle in organisations. And I think a point that I wrote down at the beginning was around the need for FM and taking in terms about adding value to really get more on the front foot and help businesses, because a business strategy typically is going to evolve and change. The spaces that people need to occupy are much more varied, and we've just had that discussion around all the different types of spaces that businesses use and how that will change and evolve. So actually FM need to be able to provide a much more flexible range of options for organisations to reflect wherever they are at their points in their strategy and whatever the evolution of that is. And then the trick to actually, well then how do you go and then deliver is indeed the communication to the people who you need to get on the forefront of that, to get them connected, to get them putting in those ideas and buying into it all. Because that's a big challenge for FM, to effectively become proactive instead of reactive to the business strategy.
Great, thank you very much. So team members at the heart of the FM strategy. For me, it's really a great book called Gung Ho. I don't know how many of you have read it. It is quite American in its nature, but the very first chapter is about creating worthwhile work and getting people to understand that they're not on stage, they're not cleaning, they're representing Wales. That's what they're doing every single day, every interaction. Mm-hmm. You know, when I worked with GSK, it was getting the cleaners to understand that by doing their job to the highest specification that they could, it enabled the people who create the drugs that save lives to do that. And so indirectly, the cleaners were helping to save lives. And to get them to buy into that, to get them to understand, because like, let's be honest, would you rather go to work to clean toilets or to save lives? Like, you know, Ethel, guess what I did today? I saved lives. Yeah, right? He gets home a day, he's all excited because he saved lives that day. It's much more exciting than saying that I cleaned 3 floors and I got a gold star because everything was cleaned to the highest KPI. So it's about really engaging, and I'm so happy that your in-house trainer has really cottoned on to that. We now have 5 minutes to move around. I hope you enjoyed this morning's session. You have 5 minutes to grab coffee, comfort break. Stream 1 is, like I said, right in the Augusta Street suite, straight ahead, and Stream 2 is slightly to the left.